If you believe we have crashed craft, stated earlier, do we have the bodies of the pilots who piloted this craft?
Biologics came with some of these recoveries, yeah.
All right, so if you're watching this or listening to this podcast, then welcome. And there's a good chance that you and I probably agree aliens are real. And not only are they real, but they're already here. There's probably more than one kind, and they're probably from more than one place. And place might not even mean what we traditionally think it means. It could mean a parallel timeline or an alternate dimension.
There are realities that are just as powerful, just as real as this one. Other cultures have known this besides ours.
Almost a spiritual dimension.
Well, or at least something, as the abductees put it, another realm, beyond the veil, they say, which is now entering into our world. So we really have no category in our culture. We're opening to it now for something that comes from some other dimension, but manifests physically in our world.
Fact number one, we do not know with any certainty exactly what these entities may be. Extraterrestrial, interdimensional, terrestrial in origin, some combination of all of the above, something we have yet to even dream of. I'm going to use the term alien merely for convenience, and I am not implying that I believe they are from another planet.
This conversation gets weird fast, and it's been polluted by misinformation and disinformation for decades. And it's hard to know where we depart from established fact to well-researched information into fan fiction, which is why I started this channel. I'm assuming that there's going to come a moment in the very near future where disclosure happens. That is, an event takes place that forces us to reckon with the fact that we are no longer at the top of the food chain. And I know that people like to think that we can take it. But just understand, there's no precedent for anything like this in human history. There's no guarantee that this all just works out. And I'm trying to take the conversation about UFOs and UAPs into a different direction, away from are they real to, okay, it's real. Now let's have some real talk. How will we conduct ourselves as a planet, as a species, individually? How will this affect our lives? And if you're going to have real talk about aliens, you have to have honest discussion about who these beings are and what they do when they show up here.
Well, I'm going to read from the Introductory Space Science, Volume 2, Department of Physics, United States Air Force. This is Chapter 13, Unidentified Flying Objects. Now, this is what the Air Force has the students at the Air Force Academy read. And it says, the most commonly described alien is about 3.5 feet tall, has a round head, arms reaching to or below his knees, and is wearing a silvery spacesuit or coveralls.
The aliens are extraordinarily deceptive and operate in a covert manner.
In encounters, the human's perceptions are controlled, as are the human's conscious memories.
I was working with a woman once who was recalling an experience. She's on the technical inside a ship. There's a physical examination taking place. It's extremely painful, demeaning, and so forth. And she is not only enraged and furious, but she's scared to death and she's undergoing pain. And the head alien, as we know from these accounts, often happens, walks over, puts his hand across her forehead, and she said the pain disappeared. She felt waves of the most profound love she has ever felt in her life. She said she would sacrifice her own children for the love that she felt for this being.
There are thousands and thousands of documented cases of contact between humans and non-human intelligence. Some of them are good, some of them are not so good. And to pretend that all of this is love and light, and this is all going to be positive for us, is a mistake.
I was a graduate student here at Stanford. I was in a used bookstore buying science fiction books, and I came across a book. There was two of them I came across. One was by John Mack, and the other was by Whitley Strieber. And I remember just seeing the cover and realizing that was the face that I had seen when I was a kid looking through the window or in the bedroom. All the skin on my body, like all the hair stood on end when I saw it, and I dropped the book. How does this guy know what I saw?
I remember feeling that the world was just not a safe place, that there was nowhere that was safe, that no matter where I went or what I did, that they could find me.
It is not written anywhere that superior technology equals superior morality. That's an idea that has taken root in this community. and I think it's important to explore the other side of it. So that's why I wanted to talk to Matt Hurley. He's the founder of badaliens.info. It's a website that gathers together some key cases that explore the darker side of the phenomena: animal mutilations, human mutilations, and alien abductions, among other subjects that are pretty dark. It's a great website to basically understand what goes on and who are the researchers you should be looking at. So I recently had the opportunity to sit down with Matt. We got into this idea of bad aliens. We talk about the threat narrative, and basically Matt gives me his perspective on what's going on. We also talk about a group called the Allies of Humanity, who have some interesting ideas about how we as a human society should conduct ourselves in a world where this is an everyday reality. And just know, I'm not saying any one group is right or wrong. I'm not supporting any one particular perspective here. I hope you enjoy the interview. And if you like this kind of content, consider subscribing to the channel. It's a heavy lift to build a channel like this from scratch. And this is a super niche subject. And I think I'm taking a very niche position inside this niche subject. So if you like what I do, you can really help me out by subscribing to the channel and showing your support. Thanks. So Matt, where should people start? What is the picture of reality as you see it?
I think at the outset what I'd say is people can potentially try and join too many dots. So they'll get into the subject of UFOs, like you said, they'll look at the nuts and bolts stuff and the evidence for that. And then they might start looking at near-death experiences, evidence for reincarnation, that sort of stuff, and they'll try and formulate a sort of a big picture view in their head. Now, my personal stance is that ultimately the UFO phenomenon is a physical phenomenon. I think these are physical beings. They're after the resources on our planet. They come in physical craft. They are capable of magical tricks with their technology and their mind to a certain degree. But we need to separate physical phenomena from spiritual phenomena. So, for example, in our last interview, you asked me, do you think, I think someone online said, do you think there's a connection between UFO or aliens and near-death experience, or abductions and near-death experiences? And I don't think I gave a good enough answer at the time, but I've thought about it since. And what I would say is that anything to do with aliens is a purely physical thing. Near-death experiences is a potential insight into a spiritual thing. So if I was to give you my big picture personally, I would say you have physical beings all over our universe. All beings in the universe need resources. They're interested in their own survival and security. And if they run out of resources in time on their own planets, they will either need to trade with other beings or become part of a collective and end up scavenging and stealing, or trying to form agreements with up-and-coming civilizations like our own. Now, that's the physical realm in a very brief nutshell. Now, beyond that, I think there's a lot of evidence to point that there's also a spiritual dimension to reality as well. So we're in the dense physical world, and I think there's a spiritual reality behind that. So we have evidence of that from near-death experiences where people come out of their bodies, they're technically dead, and they report similar observations of being in an alternative reality, seeing a tunnel, speaking to beings on the other side, so to speak. We've got cases of reincarnation evidence from young children who, under scrutiny, come up with very detailed accounts of previous lives, and people have been able to research into some of these claims, and it's matched up. So we've got seances as well. With seances, I think the phenomenon is genuine. I think the question is what comes through and what materializes. Is it actual beings on the other side, or is it a kind of a group thought form that's created? Some of your listeners, and you might be aware of that experiment in the 70s where some psychologists in America created an entity called Philip on paper, and then they went into the seance room, and this Philip entity came through, and the answers it was given to questions sort of matched what they'd drawn up on this paper. They created this fictitious character. So with regards to seances, I think some things could potentially be people from the other side, but some of it could be like a group thought form. But anyway, I've gone off a bit of a tangent there with seances. But anyway, we've got a collection of phenomena which back up or give weight to the idea that there's also a spiritual reality to our physical reality. Now, unfortunately, some of the beings that are coming here are trying to pose as lofty spiritual beings who can flit in and out of the after-death realm, if you like. And a lot of researchers are quite keen on this idea that the visitors are interdimensional. You might get a case, for example, where someone's in bed, an abductee, the grey aliens at the end of their bed and their dead grandmother standing next to them. Oh, look, they're in touch with the spirit realm. What they're actually doing, they've got into the person's mind and pulled out an image from within their psyche of a dead relative, possibly to pacify the individual, or possibly to convey the idea that they can switch between realms. So I think one has to be on one's guard when it comes to how we interpret events. So essentially, I would say the alien presence is a physical thing, but behind that, there is a spiritual reality. There's a sort of a common viewpoint within, I suppose, the New Age community that we're essentially containers of souls, and we go through experiences. Other beings on planets will be going through their incarnation cycles as well. And the idea is each time you're building up your wisdom, or hopefully building up that wisdom within you. And the idea is then eventually you rise up that mountain, that spiritual mountain, and merge back with the source. Marshall Vian Summers talks about the idea of separation. I'm going to read a quote because he puts it more eloquently than I do, but it gives us that initial big picture. So what he says is that the separation is the ongoing state and condition of being separate from God. The separation began when part of creation willed to have the freedom to be apart from God, to live in a state of separation. As a result, God created our evolving world and the expanded universe as a place for the separated to live in countless forms and places. Before the separation, all life was in a timeless state of pure union. It is to this original state of union with God that all those living in separation are ultimately called to return through relationship, service, and the discovery of knowledge with a capital K. It is God's mission in our world and throughout the universe to reclaim the separated through knowledge, which is the part of each individual still connected to God. So it's that basic idea that at the start of creation, part of it became physical and dense. We're containers of souls. These souls are part of the Creator. It's that bit that survives death each time. And over millennia, we evolve and eventually no longer need to incarnate. That's a kind of a very simple, basic idea of how I think reality is, or how it's basically defined.
So from there, are we saying that within the physical plane, we have a wide variety of, the universe is just as big as it seems to be, which is infinite. And so inside that, we have a whole drama that's playing out with many characters on many different planets doing different things at different periods. And we're simultaneously to being visited by those beings, we're also capable of communicating with these other layers of reality.
Yeah. So what Marshall says in a lot of his books is that in the spiritual realm, you've got a hierarchy of spiritual entities, and one group is known as the Angelic Assembly, and they're like a conduit between God and all sentient life. And wherever there's life on a planet, you'll have like an assembly of beings on the other side, and they can send impulses to people on a subliminal level through their spirit or their soul. And the individual, the recipient, might receive it as an inspirational idea that they think may have come from themselves, but it might be from this other realm. And it could be in any manner of field. It could be to do with talking about climate change. It could be to do with medicinal research. It could be to do with aliens. It could be anything. But there's this idea that you've got a hierarchy of non-physical beings, but they shouldn't be confused with aliens. Aliens are physical beings. They're just physical beings like ourselves on other planets. But yeah, there's this hierarchy of non-physical entities between ourselves and the Creator at various levels. It's a very difficult thing to talk about with certainty, because it's very difficult to prove. I think you can only look at empirical evidence like, say, near-death experiences, reincarnation memories, things like that, which give us a sort of a flavour of what might be in the evidence for the non-physical. When I start talking about hierarchies of spiritual beings and that sort of thing, that's very difficult to prove. I'm just really relaying what people like Marshall have said is the structure, if you like.
Well, I think that's a really interesting point, because on the one hand, we have, it is hard to wrap your head around. However, there's a ton of stuff that has just recently been released, as far as I know, regarding the CIA's involvement in studying this. There's the Project Stargate stuff, which is featured on your website. And of course, the military and the government intelligence agencies have spent a lot of money investigating the non-physical nature of reality. And it would appear certainly to be the case that the purely materialist view that we've had for so long, that consciousness arises from physical stuff, and the stuff was all dead matter here first until eventually life just spontaneously arose, that is not accurate, and that this broader picture of reality, in fact, reality seems to be a lot bigger and broader than we knew. And I think a lot of people, when they get into the conversation about UFOs, UAPs, non-human intelligence, all of it, they need something solid to hold on to. So they come in and they go, okay, well, what do we know about physics? And what does physics tell us is impossible? All that stuff, let's just put it over here. And now let's look at what's left. And unfortunately, our understanding of the universe is not complete. So we're putting a lot into that can't be real pile. And I think it seems like what you're saying is that as this discipline of UFO, UAP research evolves and we change terminology, like we've had to reinvent the terminology just to account for how weird and different all of this stuff is. And so, I mean, would you say that the biggest misconception is that, like, sort of the picture of where we begin in this place of reality?
Yeah, I think that basically the basic fault a lot of people make, they're trying to sort of fit aliens in with spiritual realities, and that it's kind of blending the two. And a lot of people now are going off the idea that they're aliens and going with this idea that they're interdimensional beings. People looking for a one-size-fits-all category for the visitors, but I think they're two separate things, and we need to be careful because these visitors have a propensity to lie. We don't go down that avenue of thinking they're more than what they actually are. I think I'm not sure I answered your question there, whether I've gone off on a bit of a tangent.
Well, no, I just want to spend a minute on the non-physical stuff, because I think I mean, you have to get your grounding. Like, you have to figure out, okay, what are the rules of this game? And then if you come at UFOs or UAPs thinking that these are just like one thing, that's almost never the case. There's like no consistency. There's some consistency, but across the board, there's just so much different stuff all happening at the same time. You have to expand your view of reality first, just to fit it all in.
I think it's healthy to look at books of evidence. So if you've got empirical evidence for reincarnation, read it. Near-death experiences, read it. UFO landings, read it. So, have a library of evidence of empirical data. Where it starts to get murky is when you start looking at the realm of channeling and communications from non-human beings. That's where you can really get stuck in some rabbit holes, and you can come up with a lot of conflicting messages, and that's where it can get very confusing. And everyone is earnestly trying to formulate the big picture and what is reality, and it can be a very dark rabbit hole to go down the world of channeling.
Well, going back to something you mentioned before, I thought was really important. That as communications cross these layers of reality, the translation, it's not always a pure message. Sometimes it's an overwhelming sense of motivation and inspiration that just overcomes you, and for something that suddenly seems very interesting to you out of nowhere. Like, I've certainly experienced that. I'm sure you have. Many people, probably most people, have felt that many times.
Yeah.
Where you're just overcome with this like sudden interest and fascination and like push to understand something or to do something. And it almost feels like I'd love to believe that it was just spontaneously coming about from my own discipline and motivation and inspiration. But sometimes it just feels so far out of left field that it's like, did someone just download that into my brain?
Yeah, I think the way it works is that if there was some other intelligence behind your particular inspiration, you're never going to know about it anyway, because it can potentially sort of feed the ego and all that sort of thing. So yeah, we carry on about our business. We do these occasional flashes of inspiration, but we don't really know whether they come from or whether it's our own inner spiritual intelligence that's given us that wisdom that we've sort of accrued over many lifetimes.
And there's some great, like, are you familiar with the Seth material?
I've probably read bits of it years and years ago. I've certainly heard of it. I know it's one of the more popular channels, materials.
There's the Ra, the Law of One. I've read a lot of the channeled material that, not a lot. I've read some, and I've read what I've read. I have found to resonate with a lot of truth in terms of the overall picture of reality, as you just described it, in a sense. I mean, and I think going back to your point earlier, the New Age movement has, if you just step back from it and you look at all the things that consistently are being said across all of it, there are some things that just kind of rise to the top. And one of them is that reality is much bigger. 99.99% of it we can't see. We're completely oblivious to, and it's all unfolding around us all the time. So a lot of what we may be seeing are beings that either are kind of popping in and out, or communicating down to, or are reflecting off of the layer that we're in. And then some beings, you'd have to imagine, with enough time, would master the technology to travel between those worlds, I imagine. Do you think that's the case at all? Or
I think with technology, I think once you're trading or you can interface with other civilizations, you probably get on an even parity with technology. The difference then is how you are in the mental environment. Can you remote view to another galaxy? If you're going to trade with another civilization, have you got powerful seers that can determine the real agenda of those people that you might be doing trade with? Have they got an ulterior motive? So the real power in the universe, if you like, is in the physical realm, is the power in the mental environment. How psychic can you be? And that could be used for good or for bad purposes, of course. But that's the difference.
Can you
talk a lot of civilizations?
Can you flesh that out a little bit? Because I think that's where a lot of people get off the bus. They're like, okay, you're telling me that telepathy is real and telekinesis is real. You know, there's a lot to unpack there. Can you walk us through some of the stuff that you have found in your own research that we, like the Project Stargate or other cases like that, to flesh that out?
You've got Project Stargate, which was initiated by the US Army, where they looked at remote viewing, and basically the individual is given a code number, and someone else will allocate a specific location to that code number, so the remote viewer doesn't know what they're looking at, and they kind of tune into that number, and then they'll start to draw and sense and see in their mind this particular remote location. And obviously the army likes to use, and the military likes to use things like this for military applications. It's often the military that are most interested in alternative ideas. And, you know, going back to Allies of Humanity, what they say is all civilizations will have their own group of remote viewers, because when they need to trade or meet other civilizations, they need to have a good grasp of what the agenda is of those visitors, and are there any ulterior motives. So it's a bit of a game of mental chess out there in the universe. That's the picture they paint. And I think now, like you say, the military on Earth are only just beginning to sort of get a grasp of what beings out there are truly capable of. And we're just getting an initial insight through practicing with certain individuals that seem to exhibit certain talents.
I think it's been pretty well established that the key to all of it has always been consciousness on some level. And that's been repeated through the decades by various people who have been whistleblowers or researchers or come out with inside knowledge on the project. And so I think it would make sense that if you're thinking about what could the big reveal be, right? Like we've accepted that this is happening. We're talking about it in the mainstream now. It's been put into the public discourse. So what is the new boundary? Like where would that new boundary lie? And it's probably there, with this idea that there is, like with the remote viewers, Jeffrey Mishlove, we talked about Jeffrey Mishlove in our last conversation, his YouTube channel, New Thinking Aloud. He talks to a lot of these remote viewers that are still around. And they talk about the successes that they had with the program and the things that they do. And if, I can't remember who it was. I want to say Lynn Buchanan. I just listened to a great interview the other day, and he was describing basically how now he gets hired by private corporations to go in and basically run a remote viewing session. And he trains remote viewers for companies now. And you have this sort of this like kind of open secret that there's a hack to the system. Like this is there's a way that you can reach out and get information that is non-local. And if people are trained in how to do this, those people are very valuable.
And a lot of police forces use psychics as well to locate, victims and murderers, etc.
Right.
In the UK, in America, and probably other countries as well. Again, it's very clandestine, but there's been a few people that have come forward and say, yeah, I used to do work for the UK government on certain cases.
Yeah.
Christopher Robbins is a British chap that's been on a few podcasts regarding that. He's psychic and he's been involved in some cases in the past. But, if you look at psychic phenomena, it's been going on throughout the centuries, just like UFO sightings. I mean, there was research into poltergeist phenomena in the 1600s in the UK. The Royal Society, I can't remember the full title now, but in a very official scientific society, looked at poltergeist phenomena back in the 1600s. And, spiritualism came to fruition in the 1800s. So a lot of these phenomena have been with us for a long time. It's just we've had trouble getting a lot of scientists on board. So parapsychology probably hasn't blossomed as much as it could have done if more scientists had taken more of an interest decades ago. By now, we could have had maybe much more of a grasp of what the human potential is. Is it genetic as well? Is there a genetic component to it? For example, with poltergeist phenomena, there's often a connection with stress and trauma. Well, why do some people trigger poltergeist phenomena and some people don't? So is there something about that person's makeup which can trigger certain things? So, parapsychology, hopefully, maybe with UFOs now become more acceptable, maybe there'll be more parapsychology departments in universities and we can look more into what the mind is capable of.
Would you say that the mainstream view of things are UFOs, UAPs, cryptids, the mental realm, all of these things? Is this all are these all fish swimming in the same ocean, or are these different distinct areas of study that should be looked at individually?
I think they can be looked at individually, but you could look for correlations between the two. So, for example, if you had a parapsychology department looking at remote viewing and telepathy, there's no harm in looking at making observations about what non-human intelligences are capable of. We might see some correlation between the two. We might notice, for example, that a lot of these aliens have got a very large brain volume. So, are they able to harness every cubic inch or a lot more of their brain volume and use it for psychic phenomena?
Would you say that it sounds like the way that you're painting this picture, that there's the physical realm that we're in, there's these other additional realms that are non-physical, at least insofar as we can perceive them, and then the mental realm is that distinct from those, and is that sort of a common space?
Yeah, you've got the physical, you've got the mental environment, and you've got the spiritual environment. Yeah, the mental environment is psychic; it's non-physical, but it's not spiritual. I would make a delineation between those two. Yeah.
So the mental environment, you see that as a completely non-spiritual. That's like as real as the room you're sitting in.
It's just that a potential that a lot of sentient beings have got. Some have it more than others, and it can be used for good or for bad. Whereas in the spiritual realm, I don't think there's that choice between good or bad. I think it's more based on love, if you like, and has a nice perfume flavour to it. Whereas I think in the physical realm, we have more choice whether we use our minds for good or bad.
So going back to physical beings from our local part of space and time visiting us here, you've done a lot of work on this, uncovering some pretty dark discoveries about what some of these beings are up to. Can you talk about your work in that area and why you focused in on that and paint a picture of what you see going on?
Yeah. I wanted to know what the alien agenda was, and I thought the most logical way of doing it was to make a list of the phenomenon that's associated with aliens. So we've got abductions, we've got mutilations of animals and humans, we've got these odd cases of people disappearing under strange circumstances. So once I came up with those headings, I wanted to then fill up those areas with particular cases, and I came to the conclusion that a lot of the alien activity on Earth is nefarious, and it's all to do with the acquisition of resources on our planet. If these beings were non-physical, nebulous beings, why would they be taking specific parts from animals? Why would they be mutilating humans? Why would they be implanting physical devices into people that have been removed at a later date through surgery? So for me, it suggests, the evidence strongly suggests, it's physical beings that are doing physical things to people. Any magic, like walking through bedroom walls or putting people in suspended animation, that's all to do with their technology levels and, to a degree, the powers of their mind. So, yeah, physical beings performing physical tasks on our planet in secret, where there's lots of communication with humans. You find a lot of the messages are very confused. They don't really correlate with one another. Again, that's another red flag. I said previously, this phenomenon's had 80 years plus to tell us of its agenda, where they're from, what they're doing here. Marshall Ian Summers uses a great term. He calls them an intervention, that they're intervening. It's not a visitation. We haven't invited them for coffee. They come here in secret. That they're performing tasks behind the scenes. Yeah. So lots of red flags there.
I think that's very interesting, the whole exopolitics part of this conversation, because I feel like that's the next frontier of where we go from here, right? Like we've had most people have been okay with the idea of we're not alone. I think most people are on board with that. And then most people pretty quickly got on board with the idea of, oh, there's UAP everywhere. And then there's whistleblowers saying we've got these biologics, we've got these things in a bunker someplace in a lab. And it was pretty amazing. There were a couple of weeks where people were pretty blown away, and then the conversation just sort of moved on. I think everybody was just so
it's weird, isn't it? Yeah.
And now it's like, okay, well, what are they doing here? Like, who are these things? Who are these beings, these non-human intelligences? First of all, how many different types are we dealing with? Is it one? Is it 100? Is it 10? What are their motivations? And, can we deal with them? It's interesting to me because you, Marshall, there are a very small number of people who really ask this. Linda Moulton Howe asked this question a lot, and I think it's important. What is our response? Like they're here, like we're seeing it. We're all seeing it. Everybody knows what's going on to some degree, that something is happening. So like we need to first of all, we need to decide what team we're on. And I think it's amazing to me how many people are just sort of like, wow, I think cool. But like, how does that affect my day-to-day life?
I think a lot of people see it as a sort of a hobby, like going to the cinemas, and they put forward theories about what it could be, but they're not really thinking there could be something a bit deep to this that I'm not really addressing. all one can do is look at the data and try and draw inferences from it. We're never all going to get taken onto a craft into one of their bases and show them what they're doing down there. That's not going to happen. So all one can do is just look at all this data, try and put it into logical sections, which is what I've tried to do in a very simple way on my website, and try and draw inferences from that. By chance, I came across the Salons of Humanity material, which seemed to sort of mirror a lot of these sections, a lot of this activity that's going on. Linda Moulton Howe was told by that retired defence intelligence analyst that there are several competing extraterrestrial groups on Earth. That was mirrored in the Allies material. So all I'm doing, I'm trying to look for correlation with difference in terms of trying to work out what the agenda is, looking for correlation between different areas.
Channeled material, as you said before, is kind of tough to grab onto. You have to put a lot on faith. It can be very, very attractive.
You start reading the material and they talk about kick back, relax. We're going to land soon and we're going to sort out all your problems. And we've got all this fabulous technology. You don't need to worry again. I think a golden rule with any channeling is, does it talk about self-empowerment and using your own discernment, or is it having this flavour of surrender and relax and don't worry? It will almost want you to be brain dead and not to think critically and logically. So I think that's a very dangerous avenue to go down. I want to use my own discernment. I want to use my own logic and reason. So those communications that address or back up what I want to do, but those are the ones I think are the ones to pay attention to.
I think that's a very grounded, practical way to look at this issue. Yeah. We know something is here. If one species or race of non-human intelligence exists, just one, then there must be thousands or millions or an infinite. It can't just be two. That would be almost less likely than there just being one. It'd be weird. So multiple different varieties of physical beings coming here, I can completely wrap my head around that. And this notion that just because they're more advanced or have better technology than we do, that they are somehow have better morality and are more peaceful and inclined to just
to the contrary. Yeah,
absolutely. Well, look at humanity. We have a lot of technology, but look at how we treat animals. Am I to believe that if you go up another 100 or 1,000 years, that just goes away? Where along the evolutionary path? I think that we are the apex predators on this planet. So we must assume that whoever we come into contact with is the apex predator from wherever they're from. I think that's fair.
Yeah.
And at the very least, if they've come in contact with one other society in their existence, they've come in contact with many, and they've probably worked out a pretty smooth system of how to deal with less advanced races. So we are emerging. It's almost like we're waking up in a dark forest and we're lost. We have no idea where we are, and we can hear sounds around us. And every once in a while we can see something, and it's very strange, and we don't know what we're looking at. So we don't know whether or not to be afraid and what to do. And so far, what I've always found interesting about this pursuit, studying this phenomenon, is how deeply rooted this idea that there's no threat. There's no threat. We are the problem. Humans are the problem. And it's almost like it's a conversation stopper, the threat narrative, to a lot of people. And when we spoke in our first conversation, one of the things that came out of that really stuck with me was how, if I was a sophisticated, intelligent, non-human intelligence, or if I was trying to subjugate a less advanced civilization, I would do it through the way they think about the world. I would completely manipulate their understanding of what's going on, and I would just control the information as much as possible. And it certainly seems like we can't get straight answers from the phenomenon. People who are abducted or contacted and given information, as you said, that information, they're told, oh, there's going to be a major flood on this day in this year, or there's going to be some terrible nuclear war, and it's going to wipe out 2/3 of the Earth's population. And then these dates come and go and nothing happens and everybody just continues on. So, and you have to ask yourself, like, well, what is going on here? And to your point, you said earlier that people who report being contacted or abducted, they see many of the same things, but the way that they're seeing them, they're being shown things also. There's almost like a theatrical aspect to this that is very much tailored to your specific way of thinking, your religious background, your memories. They have access to a layer of the simulation. It's almost like we're all in the simulation and these beings have root access and they can get in and basically understand everything there is to know about you and then produce this fantasy experience that is like just for you.
Yeah. I mean, if you're a being that can create an image and project it into a recipient's mind, you've got one hell of a level of persuasion. So you could take, for example, a religious fanatic. You project an image of a prophet into his head, and that prophet's standing at the edge of his bed and starts telling him stuff. He's likely to believe it, and then he's got a big hierarchy below him. You can potentially, from just influencing one person, trigger hundreds or thousands of people to act in a certain manner. So I think one of the tricks these beings use, they will try to influence leaders in certain fields, tailor the imagery to what their particular persuasion is, and act it out accordingly.
Is a man who lives out in the Colorado, who claims to have been contacted by physical beings, right? That are near Earth somewhere, and they are observing what's going on. Yeah. And can you flesh it out from there and explain exactly what's going on?
I'll go from the start then. So originally there were 9 physical beings. They represented different star systems in our galaxy. They were chosen by a higher spiritual presence, like that angelic assembly I mentioned earlier, to go on a mission to spy on the alien presence on Earth and report through Marshall V. and Summers their findings. Originally, they were stationed in our solar system in secret, but the intervention here got wind of them, so they're now actually moved further away. And they've channeled 4 volumes of material through Marshall. I think it started in the late 80s, early 90s, and the last volume was published in 2016. There were originally 9 of them. Several of them actually went on an expedition to meet Marshall in some mountainous area several decades ago, but the intervention got wind of them, so they had to detonate their craft, so they left no evidence of who they were or where they're from, because once the intervention gets wind of who they are, they'll then cause havoc in their respective home systems. It all sounds very sci-fi, I know, and a bit hard to chew on for a lot of people. But for me, when I read the actual material, it does seem to back up what I see, with the phenomenon that occurs with the alien presence here. So what they're essentially saying is that you've got different groups here. They all want the resources of this planet. They're well practiced. As we said earlier, they've done the same thing on other star systems in the past. One of the things the Allies say is when a civilization is on the cusp of becoming aware of life elsewhere, it's normally these interventionist type beings that they meet first of all. The sort of the spiritually enlightened benign ones don't tend to make contact at a much later date when that particular society is more ready for it.
It's like moving into a new neighborhood and like the shady neighbor who's like, hey.
So it's these shitty cosmic scavenger types that unfortunately civilizations tend to encounter first. And they have their tricks like creating hybrids, but the magicians of power and influence. They'll try and influence leaders. There's 2 things that the Allies say that the intervention doesn't want. They don't want people or the masses knowing what they do in their activities, and they don't want a united humanity, because if you've got a united humanity, particularly one that's aware of their activities, it makes a much more formidable mass of people to persuade to your particular ideas. So there's 3 key points that the Allies make about us in our future and how we need to evolve. First of all, we need to become unified. Like I just said, we need to become one race, stop having wars, stop bickering with each other, become united. The second thing we need to do is become self-sufficient and not exhaust our resources. Because if we do that, we could be prone then to other beings coming in and offering us resources, and we become vulnerable then and potentially can end up as a client state and all ending up as a workforce for other entities. And the third thing they say is we need to be discreet. So when our technology gets to a point, we need to devise ways where our transmissions aren't going out into space, so we can sort of cocoon, because everything at the moment, all our radio, TV, it's all going into space. You know, you can learn a lot from us from just tuning in. So they talk about this idea of being discreet as well. So a lot of these enlightened civilizations, like the Allies, are very discreet. They don't trade with other entities. There isn't this massive galactic federation where there's this big happy family.
I think that one's fascinating to me, because it's amazing how quickly people will buy that. Like they buy right into this idea that it's the Ashtar Galactic Command and we're all going to be ascending to the next level. There
isn't really a galactic federation according to them. You've got sort of, there are trade agreements between certain civilizations, but a lot of the sort of the utopian type ones that you might think about, they're quite aloof and will just keep themselves to themselves. They don't want any outside interference, because once you sort of open the doors, potentially then you can start getting a lot of mess coming in, and you know, these sort of interventionist type races. So you find the more spiritual-like planets that they've got their population under control. They balance their resources well, so they're not reliant on trade.
So they've, in a sense, solved their problems internally, and now they're in a state of like kind of homeostasis.
And then bringing in the woo as well, they've probably got certain people in key positions that have a spiritual connection to some of these non-physical spiritual beings. They must have devised ways of working out that it's legit and not some nefarious energy that's trying to, you know, hoodwink them, sort of thing. So there's probably a little bit of a woo aspect to some of these civilizations, but essentially nuts and bolts. You know, they're not wasting their resources. Their population's under control. They've got a secure border as well, so that you're not going to get any interventionist beings trying to come in and cause mayhem like we have here. Think of all the bases that have been built on our planet without our permission or without our knowledge. You know, what are we doing in them?
Talk about that, because I pretend you're talking to people who have no idea about the I mean, you have a very broad and deep understanding of how big this non-human intelligence issue is. Paint that picture. You're talking about bases. People have a hard time with that.
So if you've got civilizations coming here, obviously they need to have some sort of permanent structure whilst they're here. If they come from a long way away, it might be prudent for them to develop bases. So if they're taking cattle mutilation parts, they might need some facility on our planet to process this material. They might need lots of storage depots again for whatever they collect. So alien bases, when you think about it logically, isn't really a big jump. If you've got aliens coming here, they're going to establish bases. We talk about bases when we talk about going to the moon or to Mars one day. Mm-hmm. Any sentient being is going to want bases on our planet. I suspect as well they probably got bases on the moon. There's been a lot of remote viewing research into that. Some of the US military, I can't believe Ingo Swann, some of the famous remote viewers.
Ingo Swann, in his book Penetration,
spotted beings on the moon. I think might have been on the far side.
Yeah.
And they were aware of him as well when they were doing that, when he was doing it. And he got this vibe that they weren't friendly as well. So, yeah, bases, any sentient being is going to have bases wherever it is. Again, it shows how physical they are, that they're not this interdimensional thing. I don't need bases, I'm interdimensional, you know. Physical beings need bases. So they have bases undersea. There's a lot of hotspots in certain oceanic areas. The Earth is, 70% water anyway, so it's logic that they're probably going to have a lot of bases underwater. The Allies talk about there being bases at the poles as well, Antarctica or the Arctic. Inaccessible, hard to find locations.
Do you think there
as well?
Regarding some of these bases, I know that there is a lot of speculation about a precursor civilization to humans that evolved locally here on this planet, and maybe a series of precursor civilizations that jump-started each in succession. Do you think there's anything to that? Or do you think we're it?
I think we may have had a genetic upgrade in our past, which a lot of people talk about within the realm of anthropology or alternative anthropology. I agree with that. But in terms of there being a parallel civilization, I think no. I think there may have been bases here by different civilizations, maybe throughout the millennia. But I don't personally buy this idea that there's been this parallel civilization. I think, again, it's a potential red herring that nefarious aliens could use to say, well, we've been here all along. We're not trying to take you over. We've been living in Shambhala since 5000 BC.
Right.
I think it's a total red herring, that is.
I think it's interesting to imagine that in essence, humanity on Earth, we think we're this island in this vast, empty ocean of stars, and we're just sort of like this little island of life. And if we took the time to just walk around to the other side of the island, we'd find out that there's a lot going on that's been going on way before we showed up. And this drama has been playing out. Like, we think the whole story started with us.
Yeah.
And I never could really understand how that seems like one of the first things you have to let go of. And imagine that this span of time that we've existed in is so small. There must be a lot more activity going on. And so surely they have been here 15,000 years or 100,000 years, but it doesn't necessarily mean that this is their planet. It just
I think when we use the term they, we have to be careful. Do we mean different civilizations at different epochs? So it might be that these interventionist ones here now may have been messing with us in, say, 1900, but there might have been other civilizations who came here in the past for different reasons. There's accounts of the gods came down from the sky and educated man, and they have special powers. There's these myths and legends that you read about in different religions.
Zechariah Sitchin,
that sort of stuff. But yeah, when we say they, we have to be wary that we're not assuming that the ones that are here today that are doing cat mutilations are the ones that Quetzalcoatl or whatever we're talking about, hundreds of years ago. They might have been different beings. I think if we were genetically upgraded, I don't think that's the beings that are here now. I think that might have been another race that maybe were acting under a higher spiritual directive to uplift mankind. I don't think it's necessarily the interventionist type ones that are here now.
Do you think, I mean, the way Marshall explains it in the Allies material, it seems very black and white. Like these are this group of beings that are here. All of them are bad. They're not. They have none of them have our best interests at heart. Yeah. Do you think every time? And there are many reports of people having positive contact experiences. Do you think those are all BS?
Well, they may have had a positive experience, but we don't know the agenda of what's behind that experience. So if I was a race of aliens and I wanted to take over a planet, I might take people from time to time and give them a massive dopamine hit, and they'll go away thinking, oh, I had a really spiritual, positive experience with that being, which you may well have done as the recipient, but you don't necessarily know what the agenda behind that was. They could create the image of some spiritual figure in your bedroom, and again, they could come away thinking, oh yeah, I had a really positive experience. These aliens are positive. So I've got my guard on that one and think, well, yes, there are people that have had positive experiences, but what's the real agenda behind that? These beings still aren't telling me where they're from or what they're doing here. Who gave you permission to build bases that you've taken your abductees down to? Who gave you permission to go into the bedroom in the first place?
Right. I was going to say your attitude seems to be like, You're starting with why are you in my house?
Yeah.
First of all, and if you say this is your planet, I'm going to need to see a receipt or something. Yeah. You're going to have to show me something this whole idea.
You got to be prudent. Yeah. Don't get swept away by the technology and the imagery they can create.
I think, and to the extent that the people that have restarted this whole this renaissance in ufology, Lou Elizondo and Tom DeLonge and the TTSA guys and everything that's going on there. Even Leslie Kean wrote a book on consciousness and non-physical surviving death, and she talks about that in her Theories of Every interview with Kurt, and it was amazing because she says in that interview, and I if I can find the clip, I'll link to it. There's a small clip out there that just is this part, but she talks about being in a seance where she saw some things physically manifest before her very eyes in the room that she was in with a group of other people.
I always thought, if you want to know what reality is, if you've got a double-pronged look at aliens and look at afterlife evidence, you have a nice, rich, broad viewpoint of reality. So I like Leslie's double-pronged approach. She's looking at the NDEs and the reincarnation and the seances, and she's also looking at the alien stuff as well. And she's able to sort of keep them in separate compartments, but it's given her a nice, rich overview of what reality may be.
It seems like the people who have been in this area, this field the longest, what they come away with in the end, they eventually get to a point where they go, look, we tend to think that there's life and then you die. And then if something happens after that, it's something we'll never know. And it'll just be, we'll just have to all die to find out. Like when Spock died.
Nice as well. It's nice as well because there's always been people interested in afterlife evidence, and there's always been people interested in aliens. But it's nice that you've got someone like her, really logical, methodical mind that can look at both disciplines. So it's good to see. And
it definitely seems like there's something to it, like that it's just a spectrum of existence, and we're just kind of passing through it. And if you take that line, that artificial line that we put in there, and say when you die, everything, it's just this big black line, and we can't discuss what happens after it. As soon as you take that away and you just put it all together and start looking at it, you find a lot of things that make sense. It just starts to make a lot more sense. And
sorry,
go ahead. No, go ahead.
I was going to say, not want to sound profound, but if we come from paradise and we go back to paradise, maybe the idea is that we try and make our physical realm as harmonious as possible. So maybe the idea is for sentient life to try and mirror what they go back to and where they've come from.
Well, we see this too in today with people who take DMT or hallucinogenics or ayahuasca. A lot of the indigenous rituals that are based around experiencing a non-physical reality are basically kind of like a technology for going to these other realms and visiting them and coming back with information. And in many ways, that seems to be the role of the shaman in a lot of cultures, is to be that bridge between worlds. And so it makes perfect sense to me. And we have evidence that there's something obviously going on. There's something very physical happening here. So from the broad 30,000 foot view, it certainly makes sense that beings that would be here don't necessarily have our best interest at heart. I don't see why that would automatically be the case. I think we should assume that just like we're like a baby waking up in the woods at night in an unfamiliar place, and we're screaming and crying and blasting out radio waves into the galaxy, and we don't really know what we don't know. So the idea that what we do know, that what we can see, is that people are being abducted. People are being contacted, and they're being shown things that are not necessarily really happening, or they're told things that are bullshit. And then they come back later and find out that, I was told this horrible thing was going to happen, and it never happened. So we know there's deception. We know that we can't really trust what we see, because a lot of times what we see is not what we actually think we're seeing, what's actually there. And there are cases where multiple people have seen had an experience at the same time and seen different things, which I think is very interesting. And so it sounds like what you're saying is when you look at the evidence that we do have, animal mutilations, human abductions, human mutilations in many cases that are vastly under discussed, I think. You're looking at that and you're going, okay, this is really happening. This is what we can see at the crime scene. And out of all the channeled material, this gentleman seems to be locking in on that and explaining, he's giving the context for why this is happening and answering
If there
those
are
questions.
others, let me know. If any viewers are aware of anyone else that's channeling information that mirrors the data, I would love to see it. But at this moment on my journey, I've only come across the Elders of Humanity. I looked at a lot of channeling material and contactees. I went in the early 2000s. I went over to Switzerland and spent some time with him because at the time I was quite into the Maya case, but changed my viewpoint since. So, I've looked at a lot of different material. And for me, where I am as of now, that one has a lot of answers. So I think it's worth people giving it a check out, and it's all free online as well.
So yeah, and let's go there, because I think that was the biggest pushback I got on our previous conversation was, look, this guy has cult vibes all over, up and down. Like, this whole thing feels very suspect. You have one guy who's very charismatic, and I've watched a lot of Marshall's videos, and what I've found is he seems to be he's very calm. He's very steady. He knows exactly what he's saying, and what he's saying is very straightforward. It doesn't seem like I don't have to do a lot of mental gymnastics to really fit this into what I see going on. So, which immediately appeals to me. And so I go, okay, let me see more. And I think where I get a little suspicious is how slick the website looks. And I'm like, this website is amazing. And his book cover art is really good. And then there's like 30 years of material. And I'm like, wow, where does this go? And, so how do you, what can you tell us? Like, how do you address that? Obviously it feels very produced.
Yeah. I mean, he's got a team around him that are involved in the sort of the PR aspect. So that there's people that help with the website, interface, etc. But in terms of Marshall's claims of his sort of spiritual lineage, etc., I went to a conference last year in Colorado and I met him, and I didn't see any red flags. There were no signed photos available of him. He didn't have a suit and a gold watch on. He was dressed very casually. He requested no photos of himself. He sat in an old chair at the side. He did a few talks, and a lot of other people did talking as well. He had that same sort of calm, reserved, almost introverted delivery. So I didn't see any red flags that you would get with a lot of these sort of, I'm in it to make money type people.
Which we see
online as well for free.
How many of those people are already out there? Like, isn't it crazy? Like, you see these TV preachers driving, or Bentleys and flying in $100 million private jets.
Yeah.
And it's like, these guys are obviously full of shit, and clearly they're conning their parishioners and their followers. Like, there's no question. And then, you look at a guy like Marshall, and it's like, dude, if you're going to buy that jet, now's the time. Like,
I think the way I think people should approach it is look at the writings. Does it resonate with you? Does it sound legit, rather than whatever you think about what his lineage might be, or his sort of history before incarnating, if you like. Does it feel right to you? Is the message one of self-empowerment? That's that sort of thing, Does it resonate with you or not?
So let's take that. Let's break there and go from Marshall to the message. And can you basically break down? You started to a little bit earlier. Can you break it down in broad strokes? What is he saying?
So Marshall he doesn't define himself as an alien commentator. His primary thing is sort of human spirituality. So what he's basically saying is that all sentient beings in the universe, including humans, have an innate spiritual power within them, and you can categorize all beings in the universe from how much of that spiritual power they're connected to or not. He calls it knowledge with a capital K, and it's that bit that survives death. It's the bit that goes through incarnations. It's the bit that can receive inspiration from higher spiritual entities. And what he says is, to improve your interface to it, you practice meditation, which stills your everyday mind, and then the spiritual mind can start to have an influence on your normal everyday mind. It acts as a bit of a compass then eventually when it gets to a certain level of blossoming, if you like, throughout your life, and can sort of guide you, etc. You might notice you might become less materialistic. You might be less confrontational. You might become less angry. It also, you get to sort of see through bullshit as well. So, for example, if a spiritual being appeared at the end of your bed, you might be able to dismiss it as BS rather than being drawn into it being from some lofty source. So you develop a better power of insight, and not to be confused with psychic powers, though. This is a spiritual energy. And Moss said it's the most powerful energy in the universe. There's nothing more powerful because it's coming from the source, from the creator.
And would you describe
all sentient beings have got?
Would you describe this? How would you describe this for people to understand, like, what they're feeling when they're feeling this? Like, what does this feel like?
It's very difficult, really, because I do meditate from time to time, but I'm not the best personality for it. But I have become less materialistic. I'm less confrontational. So there's been some personal development stages for me there. But I would urge people really to read the material, because it can articulate it a lot better than I can in this interview, to be honest with you. But I think it might be very subjective in terms of how people can feel it impinging on them. I mean, on my journey, I started off creating a website, and now I'm talking to you. So one of the possible characteristics of it is movement in your life, changes, situations, forming connections with people. But that's just my own personal viewpoint. But I would urge people to give the material a read and see what you think.
So the jumping off point for Marshall's material is developing your spiritual awareness and your capacity to function in the in the mental realm.
Yeah, yeah. The idea is all physical beings should develop this spiritual connection, which is the essential part of you. That's the bit that survives death. And like I said earlier, all beings in the universe have this spiritual component, but for some it's very atrophied, like a lot of the intervention beings that are coming to our planet. And then there are obviously others that have a very deep connection to it.
And I guess the idea would be that as individuals develop this ability within themselves over time, as you described it, the compass becomes activated. Yeah, you will know for your own. It'll just become clear to you what's bullshit and how to separate the ice cream from the bullshit. In a sense, like it'll just become clear.
Better powers of discernment, and it's called the gift of insight as well. Right. I've no idea how much of it I've got. I might have very little. All I can talk about is the journey I've been on, and the fact I've gone from reading analysis of material to having the website, which has become quite popular, to talking to people like you. So movement is an example, I think, of where maybe it's sort of blossoming a bit, and you're carrying on that journey. You started off with a little seed, and now it's starting to sort of grow branches.
I think that certainly resonates. I mean, if you look at the way our culture obliterates attention span and really just bombards you and blasts you every day with constant media and advertisements and the noise of the sort of capitalist market-based system that we run our whole society on, is always like, you're not enough, you need more, you have to buy stuff, you have to be this thing. And there's never an end to it. And you're on this treadmill and psychologically just exhausted from like just running this race every day and with no end in sight. And from all indications that we can see, the world's not getting better, it's getting worse. And so people are like desperate, and they're going, what the hell is going on? And here you have Marshall saying, look, if you practice this, and this is nothing new. Everyone says this. All the spiritual teachers say this. If you can meditate, you will find the trueness of what's happening in the world will become clear to you.
Mm-hmm. Right? You sort of get rid of a lot of the clutter and crap that you just mentioned in a lot of people's minds. You must buy this, you must buy that.
Right.
And I suppose you get less drawn in by marketing and materialism. You realize the shortcomings of materialism and just form a deeper connection within yourself. It's quite hard to talk about, really, because it's quite a personal thing. But
sure.
I'm more comfortable talking about the alien sort of stuff, but
Sure.
Yeah.
We'll carry on. Let's follow this through and go through the rest of the message in terms of, and I think where you were leading to is that if enough people do this, our global response will be the appropriate one automatically.
Yeah. So, I mean, if we go back to the aliens, in terms of getting rid of them off our planet, so to speak, the way the Allies say it will happen is from a critical mass of humanity being aware of their activities. That will create a massive thought form in the mental environment, and it will weaken their powers of persuasion, and they will literally have to leave. It sounds very woo, and it sounds very non-techie and non-physical, but a lot of this alien activity is all to do with the mental environment. The Allies talk about transmitters being built in underground locations, and they're sending out subliminal signals to the surrounding populace. What these messages contain, I don't know, but it's all about influencing people in the mental environment. And if when we talked about parapsychology earlier, if we'd directed a lot more resources to it over the decades, we might be more aware of the power of our minds and what it's capable of doing, and realise that a lot of these beings have realised that many hundreds of years ago and are utilising it to a large degree.
I think that's, in a sense, sort of the thrust of a lot of Graham Hancock's work, which is this sort of spiritual technology that as soon as you accept that it's real and it's a thing and you can work with it, now we can start developing tools and strategies and methods to interact with the mental realm and operate in it and defend from and sort of handle ourselves on this.
I'm not sure the idea of developing physical technology to shoot them down is a realistic proposition, because surely the aliens would be monitoring our technology advances and would be putting a quash on anything that would be used against them. So I think it's the mental persuasive environment is where I think as humanity is where the power lies. People being aware of what's going on, and if the cover-up remains, that's going to be very difficult to achieve. The activities of these beings needs to be exposed. The cover needs to end.
What do you think?
Positive result.
I'm sorry to cut you off, but I just want to get your opinion on what you think is behind the cover-up. Do you think it's something as simple as like money and technology for our corporations, or do you think there's something more?
Well, I think there's been trinkets from space. I think there has been an exchange of technology, and I've got a little passage I'm going to read again, because again, it's a lot more eloquent than what I can put. This is from the Allies. Let me just find it a minute. Some governments have assisted the intervention only to find it is working against them, that it is deceptive and untrustworthy. Major governments in the world today have had contact in the past and have made certain agreements to allow the intervention to function here in exchange for certain kinds of technology. This has given license to a very dangerous intrusion into the human world and into human societies. Its influence is considerable and is directed to those individuals who are deemed to be the most compliant and the most easily persuaded. So they're talking about that idea there. There's been agreements which John Layer, etc., have talked about many decades ago. We'll give you some trinkets from space to let us abduct a few animals and people, but obviously they've it's on a much larger scale than maybe what was originally thought of, and so the government's got themselves in a big hole now.
I could totally see that happening. Like that it seems like the most human thing ever. Yeah. Like, you know what? A couple of guys sitting around a room at Northrop Grumman or at some McDonnell Douglas or whatever defense contractor, and they're like, look, they just want to take like 100 people. These are like nobody people. Like we're never going to hear about them. Don't worry about it. And we're going to get what? A flying saucer? Great. You never mind that we'll have no idea how to like take this thing apart or make it work. Right?
I was listening to an interview with Don Ecker recently, and he was talking about human mutilations, and he was talking about this case. This couple were coming back from vacation. I think they were heading back to Texas, and this human cadaver dropped out of the sky, and it was like split in two. I mean, some of the stories that are out there. I've heard one like that as well with like I think it was a cow or horse just dropped out of the sky in front of someone's car. It's crazy.
It's
anecdotes out there.
I struggle sometimes with stories like that because I think about like, what is the psychological impact of this and what is the motivation behind it? Is it literally like they're just tossing a body out the patch, or are they trying to send a message? Is this like, they just don't care because they know there's nothing we can do about it? Or is this some kind of military psyop? It's like the waters are so murky. You have no idea where it starts and where it ends. It's very hard to get a handle on it.
My thought is if you dump a mutilated body, it's a puzzle, and you can learn a lot about people by how they approach the puzzle. Can they think outside the box? Can they think laterally? What's their fear threshold like? So I think it can be an interesting puzzle. I think there might be a puzzle aspect to it. Let's see what the humans come up with.
What have you uncovered or concluded regarding human mutilations? It seems like such a strange thing to just mutilate people for the sake of it. Why? What is the purpose behind that? As far as
the allies clearly say it's to do with a hybrid program. Medicines can be developed from biological matter as well. They're physical beings. They will need medications in their own way. And some body parts are traded as well. There's illegal trade that occurs apparently within the galaxy. So body parts, animal parts can be traded with other civilizations. So mixture of reasons, but yeah, those are the reasons why.
So the abductions and the mutilations you think are related to the same hybrid program, or could there be different things going on at the same time, parallel?
There could be other reasons why people are abducted. I think primarily there's the hybrid program with reproductive material being taken from males and females, but there might be other reasons. They might be analysing the psychology of humans over generations. They might be looking at how inheritance works because they tend to follow a family line. Mm-hmm. How our biochemical makeup works, what makes us tick, what makes us excited, why are we different to them?
The hybrid program is really interesting because it's like this is something that we've heard about for many decades, and it's unfolded over time, and the stories have changed. In a sense, early generation hybrids that were reported looked very strange and very weird and not very human. And then as the decades went on, they looked very human. And then we almost kind of don't hear about it anymore. And it makes one wonder, what is going on there? What do you think?
Well, like I say, the ultimate aim of the hybrid program is to put positions in positions of power and influence within society. That way, then you can have feet on the ground,
right?
But those hybrids are psychically linked to the beings elsewhere. These beings can't breathe our atmosphere, and they can't take over our planet in an overt manner. So that's how you do it in a sort of very clandestine, behind the scenes way. But it's a long-term program, and as you say, the evidence points to the fact that early attempts might have been a bit clumsy in the outcome, but now it's getting more perfected. It could be people walking among us now, and we wouldn't know if they're hybrids or not.
Do you think, and I don't know if Marshall has spoken about this at all in his work, but do you think there is if disclosure happened and it all came out that something, to some degree we were let in on the secret, like what do the aliens do? Does life for us just go on as normal as far as we could tell, and we never see these beings and it just continues on and they just do whatever they want? Or is there a day where the skyships appear and we are like, it becomes very obvious that life's going to be very different now?
I raised this question in my foreword. I did ask the question, if the government discloses, what will the aliens do? Will they remain behind the scenes? It could be, if there's different groups, they might have slightly different strategies. So some might always want to remain behind the scenes. Some might become more overt and want to portray themselves as saviors of our planet, if you like. There is the idea that some put forward that they may have created like a fake Jesus type figure as well that could appear and perform miracles, where all the while it's connected to these beings. But if you can create a convincing religious figure, you can potentially influence a lot of people to your particular way of thinking. So there could be various different scenarios that could come to fruition in the future. That's a good question, but it's a very difficult one to answer. How will the aliens, will they want to? I think they probably would want to remain behind the scenes for as long as they can, but who knows if some rogue groups might want to be more overt especially if they're vying for control. They might change their strategy and maybe might become overt and say, well, that group there, they're the negative ones and we're the positive. You might have that sort of thing going on, where in actual fact they're all negative. So it's a tricky one to answer that.
What do you make of the it seems like this thing's picking up steam and picking up speed. And is there something going on there behind the scenes that's pushing everything to move faster? And does Marshall address that at all?
I think he says time is short. I think he was late in his delivery. I think there was some delays, and I think some other people were supposed to help him a bit earlier on than what has come to fruition. So I think we're behind schedule in terms of our receivance of the Allies of Humanity material and getting it out into the public arena. I mean, I'm doing my bit. But even if the Allies of Humanity was bogus, I still think all the nuts and bolts things are occurring and people should be addressing them. So either way, I think what I'm saying is important, if you get what I mean.
100%. I don't see anything, like when I look at the Allies stuff, I don't see anything that raises a red flag with me. It's all very practical. Like, I mean, in basic, simple terms, it's like, get your shit together as a species, figure out what planet you're on, figure out what team you're on, get on the same team, and like start solving these problems. And then we have, there's this galactic community, like basically the United Federation of Planets is out there and they're just waiting for us to stop being so backwards. And then if we can do that, we can start to interact a little bit and figure out what's beyond.
We need to become unified. Like I said earlier, stop having wars with each other. What enlightened civilization is going to come and meet us if we're still having wars? Bombing Russia and Ukraine and all the various incidents that are going on around the world. No civilization truly evolved would want to come at that stage of our maturity. That's going to be a bit further down the field if we can get to that stage, where we can become unified as one.
There's a strange irony to it.
One process map is that we become aware of the intervention, we then unite, and then that sets fertile ground then for further along down the line. We do meet more enlightened beings. The alien threat is the one thing, as Reagan said decades ago, that can unite humanity, because obviously people have got different viewpoints and different religions, and some people have been bickering for millennia. It will take an outside threat to bring people together. But again, that fuels some conspiracy theories. New world order, one world government. So you can't really win. But ideally, you want to live on a planet where there's no wars and everyone's getting on. And ideally, you don't want any unwelcome visitors here that are carrying out nefarious activity. And it needs to be called out, and they need to pack their bags and sod off.
I think that broad view of what's going on makes so much sense to me. It seems like, we are on a destructive path. Everybody can see how destructive it is, and we can all sort of see the writing on the wall. And this train is moving at breakneck pace towards the edge of a cliff.
And you've got climate change as well. Climate change. On top of that, on top of that.
I mean, look, it's obvious. You open your eyes and use your head, look around, people. It's not looking good, and it doesn't. People, I think, have this idea humanity will never go extinct. We don't have to go extinct for us to really screw this up. What we have to do is basically screw up the ability that we have to reliably produce grain at scale to feed the billions of people that need to be fed. And once our biosphere becomes sufficiently destabilized, our society becomes destabilized, and that's something you can't really come back from. I think once all it takes is a breakdown. I mean, we saw the global supply chain with COVID, how quickly everything just completely went to hell in a handbag. And I don't think it would take very long if something bigger happened for us to go right back to where we were, or regress even further. So the idea that we have this, the idea is that we're in a position right now where we have the tools, we have the technology, we have the imagination. If we have the discipline to push aside all of the other superfluous bullshit, and we can visualize a society that would feed everyone, take care of everyone, and basically be the Star Trek world, where everybody gets to see a doctor. If you need to see a doctor, we all have clean water. We can all eat enough food, and we can now conduct our affairs with some sort of dignity with the rest of the life that is out there, whatever that may be and whatever form it may take. It's literally the Star Trek scenario. That's a roadmap for where we have to go. And in Gene Roddenberry's world, it took a nuclear and biological third world war to bring us to the brink of annihilation. And then we realized, okay, we really don't have to be this way. We can, it was once we achieve warp drive, the Vulcans show up and they're like, oh, okay, here we go. I see to me, that seems like a very plausible, realistic way to sort of picture what's going on. There's this larger drama playing out all around us. There's beings that are physical. There's beings that are non-physical. They've got their own thing going on. It's been going on forever. And here we are. We just sort of show up. We barely can launch bottle rockets into space with our publicly available technology. And now we have this encounter with these beings. It would make perfect sense to me that our defense apparatus on this planet would immediately want to figure out, what are we dealing with? Is it a threat? How can we counteract it? I don't see, and in fact, I have no problem with that. That makes perfect sense to me. I don't want to not understand how anti-gravity works. If there's somebody in a lab somewhere cracking that egg or figuring out fusion, great. We need to know that. And we need to get to a point as humanity, as a species, where we look at ourselves as something more than just this. Like, what are we supposed to be doing here? Just like running around making money for other people, so like 9 guys can own everything? Come on.
Yeah, I suppose we need to have a fuller appreciation of our paradigm, like we touched on earlier about the spiritual dimension and the fact we incarnate. A lot of people are running around blind, aren't they? They're not really aware of that reality. If we had more of a holistic overall viewpoint of what reality is, that might change people's way of thinking and how they act and how they associate with one another. Because at the moment, it's, as you mentioned earlier, it's all commercialism, materialism. Parapsychology is a load of BS. But those sweet seeds that could blossom and give us a fuller picture of reality, that they're being sort of subdued at the moment, have been for quite a long time. So, certain areas of science like parapsychology need to be given more resources, I think, so it can give us more of a realistic, accurate viewpoint of what reality is, rather than
I've
just
often wondered
selling us stuff.
About the zoo hypothesis. Are you're familiar with the
idea that we're like a farm which has been created by someone else?
Or we're just in a zoo and we're sort of like isolated from the rest of what's going on, and whatever. They can come here and do things with us. They can take people against their will. They can run experiments. They can come in and check out. But we have no way of pushing out and affecting them. And this idea, I don't know, it popped into my mind one day, like, what if the bars of that cage are that we've been suppressed in our ability to operate in the mental realm? Yeah. We've been suppressed, and we've been taught not to use, like, everyone has intuition and everyone has gut instinct. And everyone has had moments where you just know, like, go left, don't go right, go left, don't get on the plane, don't do the thing, or do it, or, take the job or whatever. And you just do it. And if you trust yourself and you trust that feeling, it almost never steers you wrong. Yeah. So I think the beginnings of that telepathy and that the bones of it are there, and I think people know it. And certainly, if you are a disciplined spiritual practitioner, you can develop those abilities. And I think we've all met or seen people who do things and just know things that are astonishing. I had an experience myself. I mentioned it briefly in our last conversation, where and I only bring it up again because I think it was such a powerful moment in my life. It was actually the moment that really kicked me into this study again after taking a long break from it. But I did ayahuasca in Peru, and in my experience, I did a 2-week preparation where I didn't eat any refined sugar, no alcohol, no caffeine, no drugs, no anything, not even an aspirin. And then this huge preparation for the ceremony, and then and I didn't know what to expect. I really didn't. I was just a regular guy, and I was like, I'm going to try this.
Were you nervous?
I was. Well, my wife's Peruvian, and her father is part Quechua. So she was guiding me, and he also guided us a little bit on what to expect and what to.
They've done it before, have they?
He has, and so she didn't do it. But we went to Cusco, and there was a place there where we visited, and I got nervous because when we went, one of the last things you have to do to prepare is drink this water that basically like clears everything out of your system, because a big part of the experience is purging, and it's pretty messy. So we did that, and then we had to take a car to the Maloca where we were going to do the ceremony, and we were in Cusco, so we were already at altitude, and then we had to go up even higher. And my wife got altitude sickness, and she actually had an oxygen tank, and she was taking like puffs of oxygen. And then I went in and did the ceremony, and it was very strange because the medicine man, it was me and two women who were there, and they had been there for a few days. They had done the ceremony, I think 2 or 3 times, and I was doing it my first night. And he gave everybody the ayahuasca brew, which he started with the other 2 folks who were there. He gave them a little bit in a cup, and then he kind of like sizes you up, and he decides what you need based on what you're telling him and kind of what his sense is. And he poured me this giant glass. I mean, it was like a coffee cup. It must have been like 12 ounces. It was a lot. It wasn't, I don't know, 12 ounces is probably too much, but it was a lot. And I had never done anything like this. So I drank it, and it is true. It's the most disgusting. I mean, it tastes like at a truck stop, when the coffee pot at a truck stop at 2:30 in the morning has been like cooking, and all the coffee is cooked out, and it's all just like black sludge at the bottom mixed with mud. It was really disgusting. And I drank it. And then I had this panic moment where I was like, this stuff is in me now. Like there's no going back. Whatever's going to happen, I have now like taken this pill, and I just have to lay back and wait for it. I lie back, and it's dead quiet. No one's talking. And in the back of the room behind me, there's no one here. My wife's off to the side watching all this go on. I heard, as clear as a bell, a woman giggling. Was not one of the other 2 people in the room with me. I just heard this voice. And I was like, that's weird. I lay back, about an hour goes by, and the experience starts, and it became very clear immediately that I was not in control of what was going on, and there was something else with me. I was absolutely convinced. I felt like I was in the waiting room between worlds, backstage almost. It felt like I could feel beings in the space with me. It was almost like the room evaporated. It turned, it's like in the Matrix, you could just turn off this part of the simulation. You'd just be floating in space. Yeah. It's kind of how it felt. And I won't get into the details of it, but I had this vision of this little child, just like almost like the Kool-Aid man jumping through the wall, and like just this bombastic little energy of a child. And at that time, we were under the understanding that we weren't able to have kids. And about 2 years later, we started to try, and my son was born. And when my son was born, that was what I saw in my vision. And to this day, I'm convinced I just saw it. And I know that was the same child.
You saw his birth, or you saw him?
I saw him. I saw him, and I met.
What age? What age did he look when you saw him? What age?
It was a toddler. It was like, it's hard to explain because you're not seeing it with your eyes the way that you're seeing it with your inner eye, and you're experiencing it, and you just feel like the energy you feel when someone you really care about deeply walks into the room. You feel an energy, and you know it's them, and that's them. You see that and you feel it. And I just had this vision of a little child, and it turned out later that was my kid. And so when that happened to me, I was, up until that point, I had been on the fence about this non-physical, physical thing. And I thought, I don't know. But when it happened, I just kind of had to accept that this is a very real thing. It's happened to me now, and I understand it. And later, when I discovered the Monroe Institute, Robert Monroe, and the hemisync materials and all of the techniques that they developed for how this all works. And I heard him kind of in some lectures explain that. It seemed very much like what I had experienced. And it just seemed like to me, we're all talking about basically the same thing. There's a non-physical realm. There are ways you can go there. You can take certain substances into your body and you can tune your consciousness like a knob on a radio, and you can tune into it temporarily. And the trick is figuring out how to get your sea legs and understanding like where you are, what you're doing, and what's happening, so that you can take the information and then learning how to bring information back and translate it. It's almost like the downloads that you get are so, they're so big that when you come back and you try to write it down in a journal, it's like 99% of it doesn't make it through because you just can't, we don't have language for it.
It seems as if there's like nature has a strong buffer between the physical and the spiritual, and it can be quite tricky to sort of get into the spiritual and you say decipher and retain what you've got. I mean, some people have this idea that some people get too obsessed with the spiritual. They're not focused and grounded in the physical, like spiritualists, for example, obsessed talking about the afterlife and what it looks like. But, you know, I suppose it's important to focus on the physical, which is there's reasons why we're all here, you know.
Right.
It's good to get that evidence and bring it back. But I think some people get so obsessed with the afterlife realm that, they lose that sort of groundedness.
It just gave me the confirmation that I needed to really take on board and internalize that, like, okay, the picture, the working model I had of what reality was and how it worked was just that. It was a model. But now I've actually experienced some things that have stretched my knowledge of what's real. And it's real now to me. And when it became real like that, and I'm certainly not an experienced, I've done it once and I'd like to do it again, but it took a long time before I was ready to say that. I understand that there is a group, and I could be wrong. I believe it is a group of people over at Oxford. And I'll have to see if I can find this. There's a great presentation on this where they are actually taking DMT. Are you familiar with that documentary called DMT, the Spirit Molecule?
No.
It's based on a book by...
I've heard of DMT. I know it's a gateway, but...
So this is very interesting. The DMT is they call it the spirit molecule because if you take it straight, it's like basically flipping a switch and you're in a non-physical realm. You're suddenly someplace else. And most people who have done it say that when they're there are other intelligent entities there that you can talk to and interact with. And sometimes they want to talk to you. Sometimes they don't want anything to do with you. Sometimes they're surprised that you're there. Sometimes they turn around, like people report, like I smoked DMT. I took the third or fourth big hit. And then suddenly I popped into this room and they described them like elves. There were elves. They turned around, they looked at me, they said, "What are you doing here?" And very many, many stories like that. And anyway, there's a group, and I could be wrong again, but I believe it's out of Oxford, that their concept was, what if we could take, the thing with DMT is that it's quick onset and then it's rapid, you come back. It's like they compare it to being catapulted into orbit and then immediately coming right back down to Earth. You're there and you're there and you're someplace very different and things are happening there, but you can't stay there long enough to get a map of what it is or figure anything out. So what this group was trying to do was take the technology that we use in anesthesiology and basically administer DMT as a continuous drip that would hold someone in hyperspace for a long period of time where they could theoretically get a sense of their surroundings and start to map it out, like almost like that movie Flatliners where they, they stop their heartbeat and then they go to the other side. Same idea though. And so this is a real thing, and they're actually developing this out. And it's one of those, the person I heard give the presentation was explaining it like shamans and indigenous people have methods and means to do this. We now have developed Western medicine technology that is very advanced. What if we combined these two things? What would we be capable of? What would an explorer be able to bring back if we could send them to DMT hyperspace for an hour, a week, a month? You know, what if we could do this with dozen people? What if you could have teams of people that could go and then basically come back? Would they be able to tell us how to solve fusion and figure out the missing piece of the puzzle or whatever? So I thought that was very fascinating. And anyway, that was just sort of like my way into this whole consciousness.
I just thought of something funny. Wouldn't it be interesting to give one to a grey and see what effect it had?
Well, and that's a question. I mean, I actually bring this back to the physical beings. We're talking about multiple different varieties of these beings. I mean, where do the greys fall into this? Are they?
What I would say is that they're like a drone race that was created to perform specific tasks. So there's like a caste system with some of these civilizations where they're like a collective of different groups. So the greys are just kind of like a basic level. They're not the actual real intelligence behind the operation, if you like. They're kind of a lower level.
All greys that people report seeing basically on working for the same people, do you think? Or are different groups of greys? I mean, are greys sort of like a open source?
Probably different. It could just be like a genetic model that's being developed. But there are often variations in greys. Some have got 4 fingers, some have got more or less, some have got webbed webbed fingers. Sometimes there's slight variation in the head shape. So there's probably different types of greys as there are different types of humans, you know.
But the small greys, it seems like across the board, the people who are looking at this seriously, even Gary Nolan has said this recently, they think that those are basically biological robots.
Yeah. And you've got biologicals at the bottom, and then you've got, well, there seems to be like taller greys, and then you've got reptoids, insectoids. There seems to be some sort of hierarchy with some of these visitations, which backs up what the allies say about that.
Not to sidebar or sidetrack us off into the weeds on this one, but I have to ask because you just mentioned reptoids and the reptilian. There's a whole part of this world, this conversation about reptilians. Do you think there's something specific going on there, or is this just fan fiction that people are kind of like putting out there?
I think reptilian is quite an emotive sort of imagery to think about, but if there's accounts of reptilians, I don't see why some of them can't be reptilians, as there are accounts of praying mantises and other types. So I don't think there's anything particularly significant about the reptilian side. I think they're just one of many physical forms that aliens can take. I've got an interesting quote here about the psychology of aliens. This is to do with the lack of freedom that a lot of these races have that come here, and the fact that they're kind of robotic. Your individual freedom is not valued by the visitors. They consider it reckless and irresponsible. They only understand their own collective consciousness, which they see as privileged and blessed. Yet they cannot access true spirituality, which is called knowledge in the universe. For knowledge is born of an individual self-discovery and is brought into being through relationships of a high caliber. Neither of these phenomena are present in the visitor's social makeup. They cannot think for themselves. Their will is not theirs alone. And so naturally, they cannot respect the prospects for developing these two great phenomena within your world. And they are certainly in no position to foster such things. They only seek conformity and allegiance, and the spiritual teachings that they will foster in the world will only serve to make humans compliant, open, and unsuspecting in order to garner a trust that has never been earned. So this sort of hive mentality, very controlled, carrying out specific tasks with specific agendas. And this general idea I thought about the lack of freedom that they've got. Like we think they can fly around and do whatever they want to do, go wherever they want to do. Actual facts, they've got less freedoms than we have.
And this is across these different species of visitors, whatever they may be.
All
like
these
their social constructs.
Groups, they're all operating under a group sort of consciousness,
So the prevailing way of organizing these societies seems to be one in which personal freedom is not a priority.
What they
not
say,
to say that there is none, but it's not a priority.
Highly technological societies tend to become very secular and very controlled, and they don't like any individual creativity. Whereas what the good guys are trying to say, you need to foster creativity. You need to allow people to express themselves theologically and their own spirituality, rather than having a very controlled environment that makes North Korea look like Disneyland.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like what Marshall and the allies are trying to communicate is the things that we celebrate as humans, the personal identity, personal freedom,
we take for granted. Yeah.
We take them for granted, and we need to get real about how alien some of these beings actually are, and how little they care about what it is that we care about. Our motivations are not in alignment.
Yeah. But from observation, from observing accounts, reading about accounts, we can get an insight into how they act and how robotic they appear to be. They're not cracking jokes with their victims.
Well, I think that's a great point, because it's like, one argument you hear a lot is if they were going to harm us, they would have done it by now. And if they wanted us dead, they could have killed us all. And if they wanted to take over, they could have done it a long time ago. And there's so many assumptions baked into those arguments. Like, for one, the idea of what they want in particular, they might not want the same thing. Their idea of taking over might not look like our idea of taking over. Like you said, like they don't have to come in like Independence Day and obliterate everything. That wouldn't necessarily be the only way to take control of a society. And this idea that that if they wanted us dead, they could have killed us a long time ago. I mean, the fact is, the evidence supports the conclusion that they're here now. We're not all necessarily dead yet, but that doesn't mean that there's nothing nefarious going on. We do know there's deception. We do know there's abductions. We do know there's mutilations. We do know there's a lot of scary, dark stuff happening. So figuring out who we are as a species and what we value, and putting that into the sort of the core of our thrust forward as a society, and developing ourselves in that direction is the thing that's really going to, they want us to show up on the galactic stage ready to go, in other words, right? Yeah. The allies.
Yeah. 3 key areas is being united, being self-sufficient, and being discreet. Those are the 3 keywords that they repeatedly use throughout their material. Those are the 3 things that we need to aim for. Stop having wars with each other, become unified, become a strong unified planet, look after our resources well, so we won't become dependent on outside trade and all the vulnerabilities that can introduce. And then longer term, being discreet, not sending out any signals into space. Just
yeah,
being
that ship has sailed.
Yeah.
I feel like they know where we are now.
Voyager 1, which is like billions of miles away by now. Yeah.
Let's bring this, no pun intended, but let's bring this back down to earth and make it practical for people, because I think that this is all very, you're right. It's big. There's definitely some very strong science fiction vibes here, which is even confusing because we also know there's been like this decades-long media campaign to program the public for contact. So we don't even know how much of this is stuff we've already been programmed to believe, like E.T. and Close Encounters and all of these different films, and of course Star Trek and Star Wars and all the things that have been put into the global collective consciousness. But how does someone who is just basically trying to like afford groceries and go to work and stay out of trouble and like take care of their family, where should people put this?
That's a tricky question. I think one of the things people can do is, if you've got knowledge on the subject, is impart it to people who you think might be receptive to it. Don't be evangelical about it, but you might encounter in your life someone that might have a little bit of an interest. You might get into a general discussion about the subject, and you might pick up the vibes that they might be receptive to it. So then you might be able to suggest certain material that you've read that resonates with you that it may take on board, rather than just trying to convince everyone across the board. You might encounter in your life from time to time people that might be receptive to it. So I think that's
do folks need to, would you recommend that they just read the full breadth and depth of the Allies material, or
read the Allies material? Yeah, it's an easy read. There's no complex terminology in it. It's meant for everyone to read. And I would say read that and then just see where it takes you. You'll know if it's going to resonate with you or not. You might think it's all BS.
And as you pointed out, this is all available for free. There's no, you don't have to sign up for anything.
Yeah. alliesofhumanity.org. Read that. If you want to look at some of the evidence, have a look at my website or lots of other websites on UFO activity, alien activity.
Who do you recommend? I mean, of course, your website, badaliens.info is and I have to say, the reason we're not going through it here is because I don't want YouTube to ban this video, shut off my channel, because it is very dark. It's very dark. So outside of your own website, which people absolutely should look at, what else do you recommend? Where should they look?
I think Richard Dolan's a very erudite, intelligent researcher. So I would check out his, I think it's called Intelligent Disclosure. I think Richard Dolan's a good researcher. Been in the field for about 30 years. There's some great YouTube channels, which have got a lot of library of historical information and documentaries. UFOB is one. Mm-hmm. And there's not got Eyes on Cinema. It collated a lot of material going back through the decades and interview with abductees and various documentaries that were on VHS cassette many decades ago. They've managed to get them into video format for YouTube. So those two channels are good for historical stuff. Richard Dolan. Who else do I tend to follow? Just trying to think. Chris Lato's quite good.
Chris Lato's great.
Yeah, he's good. You can see he's got his fighter pilot mindset. 'Cause he's quite he's on the fly with a lot of stuff. He's like looking at it and he's thinking and he's coming up with ideas and conclusions while he's looking at stuff on the screen. Yeah, he's impressive and he's not big-headed. He's down to earth. And he recently interviewed Leslie Keane as well. That was a good joining of minds. The fighter pilot.
I haven't watched it yet.
The intellectual. That was quite a good.
He just posted that. I think that just went up.
Very recently. Yeah.
Yeah, I haven't had a chance to watch it yet, but he's great. I love because he kind of freestyles on it.
Yeah,
and he'll just sort of
on the fly, isn't he? Yeah.
And it's great because sometimes he makes connections that I would have never thought, and then I'm like, I think about it later. I'm like, wow, that's a great point. Actually,
he seems to sort of take on almost any subject within ufology as well. He'll talk about the Grush and the conference, then he'll talk about Leslie Keane and afterlife evidence. He'll process lots of different types of data.
As we mentioned earlier, like the Grush thing has pushed the boundary of this conversation way farther out than I think anybody expected. I think for a long time people thought one day something big's going to happen, and then it happened. And it wasn't until after it was in the rearview mirror and we looked back and go and say, wow, here you have someone who's absolutely credible, making some amazing claims that if any of them are true.
Really hardcore, isn't it?
It's hardcore.
Bodies, crash discs, malevolent ETs.
I mean, it's just the basically just that the mother of all conspiracy theories is absolutely real. It's totally real. And the weirdest parts of it that you thought couldn't possibly be real are actually real. And not only are they real, there's a room full of people studying this stuff today, right now.
Yeah.
They go in the morning, they clock in, they put on their name badge, they go to work on an alien craft or figuring out.
Wish I could get paid for what I do.
Like what? And so, I mean, it's just astonishing how far we've come. Where is, and I kind of asked you this before, but where is the new boundary? Where is the line that we have to cross to blow people's minds next? What would it take to really shock?
Well, it's got to be something really solid and empirical. I think you can have 500 whistleblowers on TV, but people will say, I'm not going to believe it until you show me, a real alien body that's been analyzed by MIT, or a video of an alien getting out of a craft in a location where there's reference points and documentation to accompany the event. Something like that. It's going to be something really, next level now. I think, people like Grush are great, and they're great for ufologists. They can appreciate the value of what they're saying, but general public, I think they're going to need, it's got to be sort of a body now, or craft in a hangar.
I need to see show me some bodies.
That's the sort of the where we're at. And
sure.
Grush said, I know where they are. I know the names. I know all the people. I can take all the mystery away from it. Put me in a skiff. I'll give you the Bible if you like.
I think it's amazing how much pushback there's been. And it's like, my argument has always been where there's smoke, there's fire, and there's so much smoke here. This whole thing is on, I mean, it's a burning house. And I think most people got on board pretty quickly after the Grush thing. It was like, okay, well, if he's not for real.
I mean, from my angle with the subject, I'm glad he mentioned the malevolent side because, I'm on the right track sort of thing. It's nice to get that sort of corroboration that he said clearly that some ET activity has been malevolent.
It's so much harder for me. It's like almost impossible for me to believe that all of this would just be harmless and for our benefit. Like, that just seems so absurd on its face, that the idea that, I think that interview with Ross Coulthart was definitely rehearsed. Like, they had gone through the points they wanted to make. They knew what they'd already had this conversation, and he set that question up, and it was like, my jaw hit the floor when he answered it. I was like, wow. Oh my God. So finally we have some confirmation here.
Isn't it upsetting though that the momentum's been lost a bit in terms of the press, and you could see how, was it the Washington Post didn't really give it as much gravitas as it could have done? Was it the New York Times? Some of your big broadsheets didn't really bother. That was an interesting insight. You can see how much lack of interest there is with some of the key media in America.
I think what you're seeing is a faction breaking off from the larger group. I think, and I've listened to many interviews from people who claim to have worked in the program, and even some things. And David Grush put out that interview. I don't know which channel it was, but this guy's podcast is really, really good. He's a YouTube channel, and he did a recent interview.
Oh yeah, I watched it. It
was really good.
Yeah.
And where was I going with this?
What a casual Grush, wasn't it? Different angle.
I mean, it was very relaxed, and it was very unrehearsed, and it felt very much like, let me just kind of like open up a little bit about this topic. And I think
we'll go for a walk in the woods, and I'll talk to you about aliens.
Yeah, and it just made it even more real. It just seemed like, this is like a real thing. People go to work and they deal with it, and there's like a boss, and somebody's got like a middle manager who's like, hey, did you figure out the metamaterials yet? Come on, like, did you get the memo? And it just seems like almost like there's to some people, it must be kind of like, this is just what we do. But where was I going with this initially? I think what you're seeing is you have a legacy program, the MJ-12 legacy program, and you're seeing people who have, and I think this was one of the things, that Grush mentioned in that interview, is that over time people fell out of love with the program. Like, regular things like human stuff, like you go to work on the flying saucers every day and your boss is kind of an asshole. And so at some point you're just like, well, fuck this guy. Like, I'm going to go out and put the word out. And so a lot of the leaks and things that are just people who are like no longer buying into this whole idea of no disclosure, we have to keep it secret, it has to stay under wraps. I think there's a younger probably cohort of people working in this program who are looking around at the state of the world, and they're probably in their 30s and late 20s, early mid 30s, early 40s. They have families. They're looking around. They're going, you know what? My kids aren't going to have a planet to grow up on if I don't do something and get some of this out. And I think what you're seeing is the faction that has been in control for so long is clamping down on their media outlets. They still have control over a lot of the legacy media. And so they clamp down where they can. And the people who are breaking free, the rebel alliance, if you will, that are trying to get this stuff out, are doing what they can do. And so you're seeing a lesser media response, but they're working with what they've got. And I think the stuff that Tom DeLonge's doing, people give Tom DeLonge a hard time. And I used to understand, I used to kind of feel that way. I thought, man, I don't know, like he just sounds like all my friends in high school who said the same stuff, except this one, he got super famous. But Tom DeLonge's playing a very clever long game. And it seems to me like what he's doing with his media company is taking over the apparatus of the program used to control the narrative for so many years through movies and television and music and print. And he's kind of hijacking that system and saying, okay, well, I can do this too. And I'm going to put out more information that is based in fact than what people are ready for. I'm going to try to raise the level of conversation and discourse. So I think there's something really interesting going on there. As far as forward momentum, and this is something that I've been going through for a while, but this is the amendment to the National Defense Authorization Act that Chuck Schumer's office put out. And let's see if I don't know if it'll focus, but I've got it in here. It's 64 pages long. The word disclosure is mentioned over 70 times. And if this goes through, this is the roadmap for disclosure. And what people don't realize, you can go to Chuck Schumer's website. I'll put a link in the show notes to this document, and you can read this page by page. And if you go through, this is literally spelling out the precise mechanism by which Congress is going to reassert control over some of these classified programs. They're going to establish a committee of 12 people, 12 experts, including an economist, a sociologist, a variety of scientists, military specialists, intelligence specialists. The people selected to be on that committee are going to come from suggestions from the White House and from both houses of Congress. And there is a timetable baked into this legislation that says that this group is responsible for working with the National Archives, and their job is to go through every program anywhere under any level of classification. They get full clearance to go wherever they need to go, walk into any room they need to walk into, and confiscate and just basically establish some kind of like eminent domain over this whole situation. And then internally, they get to decide and review what they find and decide how it gets disclosed. Not if, but how, over a very specific timetable. Danny Sheehan, the famous attorney who is working for disclosure, he's actually got a nonprofit whose whole purpose is to push for disclosure.
It's got an organization, yeah.
He did an interview recently where he talked about this, and he said, this is it. Like, if you want to know when disclosure is going to happen, this document, this is it. Go read this amendment. It's almost sure to pass. And certainly there's no reason why the Senate Majority Leader would have to put out any UAP legislation. It almost seems like a politically insane thing to do in any other period. Yeah. But somehow this is all going through and it's happening. And so that just puts more weight behind this idea that there is something coming. There's some kind of a constraint on time, as Ross Coulthart said. He said there's a constraint on time, and there is a push to get the stuff out of there because out of the classified programs and into the civilian world, where civilian scientists can start looking at it and drawing conclusions and getting their hands on this data.
Maybe the bowels of the government have realised this hybrid program is getting advanced, so they're running out of time before the DET program reaches fruition.
Well, it definitely seems like they've lost control over whatever began as a very contained government program. I mean, we have Colonel Corso saying in Day After Roswell that he was tasked with distributing this material from the Roswell crash to Bell Laboratories, IBM, all of our best technology companies at the time. And then their job was to reverse engineer it and see what they could come up with. But then it's sort of the story after that of what happens to this material sort of goes into the gray zone. And I think a lot of it is stuff that they started to develop internally. And even in the UAP hearing that David Grush did with Fravor and the other pilot, he said that these were Ryan Graves. The funding for this is coming. Congress thinks they're funding XYZ programs, but that funding is being misallocated internally by these defense companies towards these black budget projects. And so we're spending billions, if not trillions of dollars to develop technologies in secret for private corporations using taxpayer money on technology that could be world changing. I mean, I don't think it really has sunk in for people yet how important and how big of a change some of this technology would mean. I mean, it would literally be the difference between like going to work in your shitty car at a crappy job, sitting at a crappy desk and like hating life like we all do all the time, to like, we could have unlimited free energy, a medicine that is 1,000 years beyond what we have today. You could eliminate disease. You could eliminate hunger. You could eliminate poverty. We could be living in a very robust Star Trek world. We just have to get over this idea that only like 12 people can own everything, and they have to own all the companies and be in control of all the technology. Anyway, I mean, there's a group called Disclosure Team, and they operate a Instagram channel and a YouTube channel that I follow, and they've been really on the alternative energy aspect of this. And I think, you know, I mean, the conspiracy is probably not all that complicated. It probably just boils down to money and power, like everything else that we do. I mean,
I've got a question for you.
Sure.
Which do you think will be the biggest paradigm buster? The reality of the alien presence, or that we're spiritual beings? You know, so we talked earlier about the near-death experiences and the reincarnation. If people had a full awareness of that, I wonder which would be the biggest reboot for humanity.
Ooh. I think for where we're at right now,
is the moral ethics side something we need to work on more than the tech, maybe?
I think
got a bit of are we up there with tech, but we're down there with...
I think people are going to need to see some. I'm with you. I think it's got to be physical. I think people need to see a craft hover. They need to see anti-gravity. I think if you showed somebody anti-gravity, a functional in broad daylight at a real test facility, you know, like at demonstrated at a place like NASA, I think that would be the moment where people would go, okay, like we have now, everything that came before this is a completely different era, and now we're in this new paradigm. Now, whether or not anti-gravity has anything to do with aliens is debatable, and I think there are a lot of very intelligent people who say that we cracked gravity in the 50s without any help from aliens. Like T. Townsend Brown was working on electrogravitics at that time. But I think that would be one. Seeing a body. I mean, even if for all we know, we've already seen bodies. Like the alien autopsy video, there's been very compelling arguments that is not fake and that's very real. And that the push to present it as a hoax was something that was done later to cover up the fact that it got out in the first place. And so going back to your point, we don't know the extent to which we're being manipulated. So we really don't know. So what people are going to need to see is something very simple, very basic. They're going to need to see a flying saucer pick up off the ground and float in the air or something like that.
Yeah. So if someone saw that, right, or another scenario is it was scientifically proven there was an afterlife, which do you think would have the biggest impact on humanity?
If you could scientifically prove that there was an afterlife, I think that would probably have the bigger impact. I just don't know how people would accept it in this particular. It seems like where we're at right now. Richard Dolan has talked at length about like the trajectory of our technological advancement seems to be in the hands of a few very powerful corporations. And, you know, it's like Mark Zuckerberg doesn't care if we kill every last dolphin on the planet, just so long as you pay him to experience virtual dolphins in the metaverse. Something big is changing. We're in a time of like a complete shift in the paradigm that we're living in. And it's hard to see when you're on it, when you're on this ride. But when it's over, we'll be able to look back and realize exactly what was happening. And just how big it was. But right now, it just feels like we're all on this wave together and it's just rising and something big is coming behind it.
I feel for me, it's like a childhood interest that I had from like 8 or 9, but it's something now over many years, I formulated certain opinions and I can, you know, expound them to others. And, you know, you're interviewing me now and I can air my thoughts. That journey I've been on has come to this.
As people come to this subject and they are finding their footing and learning about it, what is something that you can tell them that would what is some wisdom that you've gained over the years of researching it yourself that can save them some time and some frustration?
I think in terms of wisdom, I would say don't assume that any intelligence that comes here who has got great technology is necessarily spiritually enlightened and benign. I think if you start thinking that, it will take you down a lot of false avenues. So it can save yourself a lot of time if you start out with that idea when you get involved in UFO research, just to be wary that when you come to formulating opinions, that the evidence points to the fact that spiritual advancement and technology advancement can be two different things.
That's a great place to leave it. Thank you, Matt. That was awesome.
Thank you.